This is Free to Exchange, the show where free markets and free-thinking scholars meet. I'm your host, Ben Powell. Most of us don't like paying taxes. Some of us consider paying them a necessary evil. But what about when governments tax us for our own good? Increasingly, governments are singling out particular products or services for extra taxation. They do it with cigarettes and alcohol, of course, but now also fatty foods, sodas, ice cream, plastic bags, and a whole range of other goods, supposedly to make us better off in the process of raising government revenue. But is that why these taxes are really implemented? Do they actually make us better off? That's the topic I'll discuss with my guest today. My first guest is Dr. Todd Nesbit. Dr. Nesbit is an assistant professor of free enterprise and entrepreneurial economics at Ball State University. He's also the co-editor of For Your Own Good, Taxes, Paternalism, and Fiscal Discrimination in the 21st Century. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So, start by giving me the argument for this. How is it that these taxes are supposedly for our own good? How does taxing me make me better off?
Historically, they've been primarily motivated more from an externality issue. So when you have some type of action, so you consume cigarettes, well, there was a secondhand smoke issue. And so it was like, oh, well, we as in the government want to discourage that secondhand cost, right? So onto these bystanders.
Right, this is a traditional pollution type argument.
Right, so a lot of the pollution, and whether it be water or air pollution. And so it was discourage the consumption of these activities to discourage the negative action, right? That's
not what these are now.
No, they've certainly transitioned more so toward addressing what I call internalities, right? And so I'm behaving in a way, smoking, that's damaging my own health. So another way to think about that is damaging my future self, right? So whether it be through consumption of cigarettes or consumption of fatty foods where I'm now and less healthy. And so the argument is, oh, well, we're nudging you. I don't think it's quite a nudge, it's more of a push, but trying to encourage individuals to really behave in a healthier manner or more politically acceptable manner.
So the government cares more about future you than you care about future you.
Supposedly, yes. Now, you kind of have to question some of those incentives. Why would somebody else care more about my own future self than I would? That's highly questionable. And are they going to have all the same information about what I care about, what I find as important as I would?
And your present self counts too, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So when we do these things then, because we care about our present self and have desires, if you stick a tax on things, we're going to respond to it in maybe ways different than what the government necessarily intends. What are some of the types of responses to these?
Yeah, so if you think about the cigarette tax, for instance, again, I don't personally smoke. I don't like smoke, but so I think that certainly people would be better off being healthier by not smoking. But that's not always how people want to smoke, right? And so a lot of people will turn to, well, I'm going to stop buying it legally. And if the price gets high enough, then I'll turn to underground markets. And that's certainly what you're seeing in New York City, see it in Chicago, where the collective taxes before you even buy the pack of cigarettes in New York City is $6.86, $7.17 in Chicago.
Per pack.
And this is before you even pay for the cigarettes themselves. And so a pack of cigarettes in those two cities is easily $13, $14. Whereas you can get it for under $6 in most states. Right? And so people are naturally turning into this underground economy where people are buying in bulk from low taxing states and then selling illegally in some of these higher taxing states. And so it's encouraging this underground market, leads to more criminal activity. Once you take that first step into the underground market, maybe it's easier to take the next step and engage in other consumption. And so there's a lot of the smuggling aspect that goes along with it. And so I think that's just one particular example with cigarettes. Certainly people will substitute in regards to the quality of the cigarette as well. And in cigarettes, quality is the flavor. Flavor comes from nicotine. And so they're substituting from, on average, cigarettes that have less tar in it toward cigarettes that have more tar, which is really what does damage to your lungs.
Right, because with the big effect of the tax, the marginal difference in the cost of a good pack versus a bad pack becomes trivial.
Right.
So the people who keep smoking might smoke unhealthier cigarettes as a result. But Do many people get discouraged and say, you know what, I'm not going to smoke cigarettes because of these taxes?
Certainly there is some adjustment. So there's consumption of cigarettes does fall with these taxes. However, at this stage, we've long exceeded at the level of taxes on cigarettes and a lot of these other items, long exceeded the externality benefit and the internality benefit. People that were going to stop smoking, they would have already stopped. The people that are responsive to the price changes, they've already stopped smoking. I mean, you can keep on increasing these taxes. The response is not going to be that much at this stage.
It's just punishing people at this stage.
It's ultimately just punishing people. And if we think about who's actually being punished, who are the people that primarily consume a lot of these sin goods? Cigarettes, we have roughly 27% of all those who live below the poverty line consume cigarettes, whereas it's only about 18% or so for those that are above the poverty line. So a higher percentage of those who are poor are consuming cigarettes. Same thing with gambling and other, again, sin goods. But it's also a higher percentage of their budget because as your income increases, if it doubles, you're not going to double your consumption of cigarettes or alcohol or gambling. That would be abnormal. And so it's a much higher percentage of their budget. These taxes are really punishing a lot of the poor.
Yeah. And what about another one of these then? So I bet you a lot of people have sympathies about cigarette tax, but the one that's been in the news most the last couple of years, it seems, is the soda tax or the fatty food tax.
Yeah, these have been really intriguing. Certainly Philadelphia has passed one. Seattle passed a tax on sugared sodas or sugared drinks. And I think an excellent example of what we see, what happened there, Costco has, there's a picture that I saw that somebody posted that Costco posted, here's our price, here's the tax, which was really quite substantial. And so then they posted the full price. Right beside that sign, they gave the address to the next nearest Costco that was outside of that taxing jurisdiction. And it was basically with a sign that said, look, we don't like these taxes either. If you would like to avoid it, here's our next closest store where you can avoid the tax.
So how do these taxes come into being? So the normal story that we'd hear is the wise government health officials have decided that these things are bad for you, and we're going to nudge or push, as you said, you away from taking them, using them by taxing them more. Is that how these taxes really come about?
Not normally. I mean, certainly there is this bootlegger and Baptist story here, right? So there are individuals that truly care about trying to improve other people's health, society, the overall health of society, or improve the environment. And so those are kind of like the so-called Baptists in the story. But the bootlegger is, okay, well, who stands to gain from this? Right? And so if you look at let's stick with the tax on sugar and drinks. If you look at grocery stores versus convenience stores, the Grocers Association is really the ones that, they're the ones actually lobbying against it, right? Because whenever you go buy soda, you're going to buy at a grocery store, you're going to buy a lot. That's a pretty high tax then. And so ultimately their sales have fallen, especially in Philadelphia. Sales at grocery stores have fallen of not only just the soda, but also other items. Because if you're not buying your soda at the grocery store, well, I'm trying to go to this other grocery store that's across the city boundary where it's not taxed. Well, I'm going to do all my shopping there. Mm-hmm. And so the groceries in Philadelphia have come out now against this, whereas it hasn't really affected.
So who's for it?
Who's for it is a lot of the convenience stores at this stage. They've seen that they've had an increase in some of this, some of these taxes or some of their sales, because it's like, oh, I still need some of this. I still would like to have a soda, but I don't want to pay this huge tax, and so I'll go get a single 1 liter bottle, and so it's a little bit more palatable. And so there's been a shift to where sales have actually happened. So that's one example. Certainly that you do see, if the tax has been earmarked to fund a particular program, those that are going to benefit from that program are the ones that primarily are going to support the tax, even if ultimately we don't see the overall expenditure increase that was expected. Right? So if you think about within, say, that the tax on gambling, right? So it goes in many states to education. So the education area is certainly supportive of these.
Right.
But unfortunately what we see, there's a lot of budget crowd out. You get these new funds devoted toward education, and it crowds out some of those that have been spent there before.
So in our last few minutes here, let's talk about Texas in specific, because in your book that you edited, there's a chapter that creates essentially a nanny state ranking among the 50 U.S. states. And in it, you measure how much they tax different goods selectively like this, but the flip side of it, how they subsidize it,
Yes.
And then how they just ban and prohibit. How does Texas stack up?
Yeah, so Texas overall is in our index is 32nd, right? So whereas Texas looks really good in a lot of these other competitive business rankings that are out there, in terms of paternalism, 32nd overall. The area where Texas performs worst is in the subsidies, right? So giving state subsidies, and so this is really cronyism, right? So it's selectively choosing which companies are going to succeed and get the subsidy, and which ones don't. And so Texas certainly spends a lot of resources trying to draw in certain businesses, offering various types of tax abatements and sometimes direct payout to locate there or even stay.
So these would be things like wind energy subsidies or solar panel subsidies,
Yes.
something like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Whereas on the other side, we're not so bad at taxing your sodas or your cigarettes
No.
or something.
No, so bans and regulations is actually where the state performs best overall in the subcomponents. But certainly the state doesn't tax, it's like 12th overall in the use of selective taxes itself.
So to wrap up, last few seconds, if you had to boil it down, what would your policy recommendation to be of how we better structure tax policy with regards to these goods and others?
Yeah, so I'd say that we need to certainly try to limit or even eliminate altogether, if possible, the use of selective taxes, selective subsidies, transition more toward support toward broad-based taxes overall, but more so than anything else is really just support, actually trying to put all the taxing authority more at the local level, as much as the local level as possible, to allow for more experimentation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Todd. Up next, are your plastic shopping bags bad for the environment? Should the government ban them or tax them for our own good? Stick around to find out what my next guest has to say about it.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from the Helen Jones Foundation, supporting education and the fine arts in keeping with the philosophy of Helen DeVitt Jones, who devoted her later life to sharing her wealth as a patron of philanthropic causes. The Helen Jones Foundation.
Founded in 2013, the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech University promotes the teaching and study of free market economics. As part of our programming, we sponsor a public lecture series open to students, faculty, staff, and the general public in the Lubbock community. Often, the speakers in that series are the guests that you see right here on Free to Exchange. More information is available at www.fmi.ttu.edu or by email at free.market@ttu.edu. Welcome back. Joining me now is Dr. Frank Stephenson. Dr. Stephenson is the Henry Gunn Professor of Economics and the chair of the Department of Accounting, Economics, and Finance at Berry College. He is also a contributing author to the book that we've been discussing today, For Your Own Good. Frank, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
All right, so we've started about talking about these taxes for our own good. One of them that's sometimes taxed and sometimes just outright prohibited is plastic bags. How is it that taxing plastic bags or prohibiting them is supposed to make us better off?
There are two major rationales for banning or taxing bags. One of them is that they contribute to carbon emissions. Bags are petroleum derivatives in part. And the second is that they are found on roadsides and highways as part of litter. So they contribute to the litter that we see in public.
Okay, so they have oil in them. How much? It's a plastic bag. How much oil does a plastic bag have in it?
Oh, not much. Way less than lots and lots of other things. One of the themes of the book is that a lot of these selective taxes are very arbitrary. And if we're going to tax things that have carbon in them, bags ought to be one of the last things you'd get to, because they're just a few drops that you can get lots and lots of bags out of a single gallon of oil.
And when it comes to litter and landfills, I mean, I've got one of these things here. I mean,
They scrunch down pretty good, don't they?
how significant is this?
It's also a very small part of litter. People have done roadside studies where they go along and pick up litter all around the country, and they find that typically less than 1% of all litter is these bags. And again, you see the arbitrary nature. No one's proposing taxing on the basis of litter. Lots of the other things we see. We see fast food wrappers. Somebody goes through the drive-through and eats their Taco Bell burrito and drives down the road and tosses the wrapper out, or they eat their Big Mac and toss the wrapper out, or they toss out a few beer cans. Beer is, as you talked about earlier, already taxed.
So when cities have done this now, and actually even a couple of states, what are the states that have done it?
There are 2 statewide bans are in effect, Hawaii and California.
Figures. And actually it started with, was it San Francisco was the first major city?
San Francisco was the first major city in the U.S. to have one of these bans. D.C. was was the first major city to have a fee or a tax.
So how do people respond when you either ban the bags or tax them?
Right. So
I still need to bring my stuff out of the store, right?
Right. And so we economists like to always ask compared to what? And people don't generally get these bags just because they sort of really have a bag thing. And I just want some bags because I just really get some jollies out of bags. We have bags because we need to take our shopping home from the grocery store or other places. And so there are really sort of 3 alternatives that one can do. One, you can allow like the warehouse kinds of stores. You can have maybe a box in your car or just put things directly in the trunk of your car and don't use bags or anything of that sort. Another alternative, of course, is that they're paper bags. Paper bags, it turns out, are much less green in terms of carbon emissions and things like that than these plastic bags.
Oh, wait a sec. Let's just stick to that point for a second. Most people think paper bags are better for the environment because that's just trees. You're saying that's not true?
Trees are a renewable thing. I'm on a college campus that has 26,000 acres. Many are covered with pine trees, and we love to have trees cut and make paper bags. But the process of logging them and taking them to the paper mill and refining them into bags is much more carbon intensive, according to people who've studied these, than these little simple plastic bags that we're talking about.
But some places will tax my plastic bag or ban my plastic bag, but tax my paper bag then to account for this. It seems like they've got it backwards.
That's the California model, in fact, is ban plastic and tax paper. In California, the fee actually goes to the grocery stores, which is part of why grocery stores were fond of this. One of the other aspects that we'll shift to at some point is talking about the political economy of these bans. And there's some folks who figured out, hey, bans can be good for me. California grocery stores figured that out, among others. So-called green bag manufacturers in California figured that out. And so you have these coalitions of environmentalists on one hand and people who figure that they can sort of work an angle in the marketplace that they couldn't work in the marketplace via these policies.
Yeah, so the public interest story is these are bad for the planet.
Right.
And the private interest story is people who make money off the substitutes really like this stuff.
Yeah.
So you'd started talking about these substitutes. Paper bags is one of them, but we found it worse for the environment. But isn't it nicer though, like these green bags, we use environmentally friendly, bags that are reusable.
Mm-hmm. Canvas is the sort of model that people like to tout, and you see people sort of carrying them around almost like a little green status symbol sometimes.
They have little green symbols on them sometimes.
Yeah. And the thing about those is that folks who've looked into carbon associated with those is that they take about 130 uses to be equivalent to the carbon in one bag there, one of these little plastic bags. Now, it may be that some people end up using them 130 times. They use them over and over and over, and if they do, then okay, on that they've reduced carbon emissions. On the other hand, if they lose them or forget them, and by the way, you also need to wash them to keep them from being, carrying E. coli around and causing infections and things of that sort, which is also sort of involves energy and carbon usage and the like.
Washing them?
Yeah.
I wonder how many people watching have used one of these reusable bags that actually washed it. I can't remember ever seeing my wife wash one.
It's not that common. There have been studies that have done samples and let me test your bag for E. coli or something and found very high infection rates. So you get some chicken at the store and it's in a sort of sloppy package or what have you, and it leaks out a little bit in your cloth bag, and all of a sudden you've got a contaminated bag. It actually, when San Francisco imposed its ban, it led to an outbreak of illnesses that increased. Led to a noticeable increase in hospitalizations. There's a real nifty paper that examines the San Francisco versus neighboring areas and finds that foodborne illnesses went up when San Francisco imposed its ban.
So
unintended consequences, like we like to talk about, right?
for our own good, they made us sicker by getting rid of plastic. You said 130 times. What if this isn't a single use? I bet you've used these for other things.
Yeah. In fact, these things really aren't. One of the things that people are doing these days to try to pitch these as being bad is, oh, it's a single use bag. Well, there are lots and lots of other uses of these things. You can, people can put their muddy shoes. They can take home their dirty workout clothes. They can use them to cleaning up after walking the dog. There are lots and lots of other uses for these things. People can use them as trash can liners at home for sort of small bathroom-sized trash cans.
Yeah, I used them to bring the books to the set today.
Right.
It worked out pretty well.
Yeah, the people like the handles on them. In fact, so interesting though is that we don't have to rely just on anecdote about the single-use thing, because there's a real nice study done by a recent Ph.D. out of Cal Berkeley, who looks at supermarket scanner data, and she says, okay, when you have a city in California that bans bags, before the statewide ban went into effect, they had a lot of city-level bans. Mm-hmm. The statewide ban was almost redundant because so many cities in California had already done it by that time. But when the city bans went into effect, and one would go into effect earlier than some other city, and so she relied on the timing to help sort of tease out the effect of this. And she got supermarket scanner data and found that when these bags were banned, there was an uptick in the sales of traditional plastic trash bags, particularly the smaller size ones that are sort of substitutes for these. There wasn't that much of an uptick for sort of what you might call the tall kitchen bags. They're the 30, 40 gallon ones for the 2.5, 3 foot high kitchen trash can. But the smaller sizes, which actually aren't even stocked all that much in grocery stores. You found lots and lots of alternatives for the tall kitchen bags, different scents and whatever.
Right.
And then you see hardly any of these. You'll see just one or two brands of these sort of smaller size ones.
Because we're all using free bags.
Because we're reusing these. They usually get at least 2 uses. Okay, and so we bring them, not every one, of course. And the other piece here in terms of litter and reusing these things is that in the U.S., whether there's some recycling streams for these things, there's the reuse stream, and then most of it goes into a landfill. Okay, the places that have real problems are places that don't have sort of solid waste levels like we do, solid waste services and processes like we do here. So some poor countries have some different issues with these, but in the U.S., these kinds of issues are really pretty low. And that's why we don't see that much in terms of bags as a share of the litter on the highways.
So you had started to tell us about who is for these and benefits. So obviously the manufacturers of green bags, but what about the grocers? Where are they on this? How come they're not out there saying, no, don't do this?
Right. Well, there are a couple ways that grocers benefit from these. One is it takes some cost out of their production process. It's not terribly high, but the grocery business is a fairly thin margin business, and they pay about a penny a bag to provide them for us. And so if you bring home 10 bags or 12 bags after a shopping trip, that's a little bit of money they save. It's not a lot, but when they add it up over a whole bunch of customers, day in, day out, week in, week out, it can turn into some money. I think we put a little back of the envelope calculation, and it was in the tens of millions in California, perhaps. And so not humongous money, but save some money on the business. The other thing in California is the way it works is the paper bags, that they have to charge a fee. The government actually doesn't get the fee. California has a supermajority tax rule, so they couldn't actually enact a tax on the paper bags. They require the grocery stores charge a fee, and the grocers like the fee because the fee is set high enough they make a profit on the paper bags. And so we're taking cost out on the plastic bag side. We have a new profit stream, probably not tremendously large, but a new profit stream from the paper bag sales, and grocers come out as winners in this.
So bring us from California then to, California here in Texas, Austin. Austin did a version of this. What was going on there?
Right, so Austin is one of the few localities in Texas that has sort of experimented with these. And one of the big concerns there was the sort of volume going into landfills. It's at face value, you can be a little skeptical. These things, as you demonstrated earlier, sort of mashed down pretty tightly. But they were concerned about how much went into landfills. And so when Austin banned the sort of so-called single-use bags, they also allowed stores and people to use what were considered reusable, thicker, heavier, reusable plastic bags. And they very carefully kept track of what was going into landfills and found that basically the thinner bags had been replaced more or less one for one by the heavier, thicker, so-called reusable bags. People weren't really reusing them at a particularly high rate, and they were still willing to throw lots of them away. And so it didn't seem to get much out of the waste stream. And of course, thicker, heavier ones have more carbon content and the like in them.
So in the end, Austin just got to feel good about itself, but didn't really do any good.
Yeah, we see from time to time policies that as a former colleague of mine like to say, make us, we like to feel good even if we're not doing good.
It sounds like there's a whole bunch of that with this. Thank you for discussing it with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I won't make it a big secret. I don't like paying taxes, but I really don't like it when the government adds insult to injury by saying that they're taxing me for my own good because they know what's better for me than I do. If you believe what my guests were talking about on the show today, oftentimes that's just a cover story for what's really going on. It's not for our own good. It's for someone else's good who financially benefits when they tax us to change our behavior. And even then, we often don't change behavior very much. They're just punishing us for doing something that some nanny somewhere decided they didn't like. I wish the busybodies and nannies and petty tyrants in government would just leave us alone and let us make our own choices. I think that would be for our own good. See you next time.
Your favorite PBS shows, ready to watch when you are. Anytime, any place. Find more ways to explore than ever before